Hi and welcome to the Catching Up Podcast, your show about speedrunnings and the runners themselves. I am Sen Knight, your host, and today we have the chance to have Tinahacks with us, a speedrunner all about pushing the games and herself to the limit. Join me as we discover more about the woman behind the speed. Hi and welcome to the Catching Up Podcast. I am your host, Sen Knight. Thank you very much for tuning in again this week. This week we have a special episode. It's with Tinahacks, so welcome to joining me today. Super appreciated.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Let's dive right into this then. I want to know, like I say at every episode, but I want to know who the speedrunners, how they are speedrunning, but also who they are as a person. This is really important to me. So let's discover who you are as a person. Like, how did you discover gaming in the beginning? Like, were you really young, or did you discover?
I was super young. So I grew up in a military family, and I grew up overseas. So
is it okay to divulge like where overseas?
Yeah, I lived in Japan.
Oh, cool.
Up until I was 7, I lived in Japan, and my family had a computer, which is how I got into programming and eventually information security. And then my family also, when I was very, very young, purchased a Nintendo NES.
Yes.
So my first video game experience was, almost certainly dying to the first Goomba, but Super Mario Brothers was my first game, and I was glued to that thing up until probably when I was 8 or 9. I got started really early programming, and then that kind of took my focus for a while.
I get that. Okay, programming then. So I don't know how old you are, and I won't necessarily ask unless you want to say it.
I'm old. I'm old enough for Super Mario Brothers to have been my first game.
Yeah, but that only puts you like the same age as me. I'm 33, so we were probably really close, right?
We're real close.
All right. So programming at that time, like, how old were you when you first started to like dabble in it?
So when I first started to dabble, it was right after I moved to the States, so I would have been either late 7 or early 8 years old.
Which puts us in really early stages of computer at all. Like, it was before Pentium 2.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the first machine that I programmed on was a Commodore 64.
That's cool, actually. We had that at home, but I didn't program with it at all. We played games, but yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I never got into Commodore gaming until much, much later in life. Commodore was strictly a computer for doing serious work on.
Well, I've never programmed for anything, but I do remember having a computer a little bit later on. It was ran 486, so it was better than Pentium 1, I guess, but it was still really archaic. And I remember that you had to I didn't even have Windows 3.1, so you just booted up and ended up being on C2 dots. You had to browse your way manually into everything. Like, I really like how computers turned out today. Everything was so laborious.
Much more convenient now, for sure.
Yes. But it's still really interesting to see that the peoples who are maybe born earlier do end up having some kind of an edge and understanding how like everything works. Like
maybe I think that there's definitely a sweet spot.
Probably.
And I got ridiculously lucky. I learned largely because I lived next door to a programmer after we moved to the States. And so having somebody who you live next door to being willing to put up with an annoying, 7, 8-year-old kid that you are nominally teaching to program was super good. And then on top of that, I was lucky enough to be in a gifted program, which further encouraged those sorts of exploration.
Yeah, but if you're like 7 years old and you're learning through, you say, a neighbor, so it was just like a friend of the family, and you ended up going there once in a while, and you were asking questions. It was out of curiosity, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, it was probably a lot of fun.
For me, yes. I'm sure that, in retrospect, I'm sure that I was super annoying. mistake. I have no doubt that it was a tremendous amount of charity on my neighbor's part.
Well, it paid off because at the end you did end up doing a lot of that later on, and you're still doing it today. I mean, I remember tuning in into your Twitch account where you were doing just a little bit of coding and hacking a few days ago. It was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, a few days ago. That was I've been working on Linux support for the Stream Deck.
Oh yeah, that was that. Yeah,
Elgato doesn't support it natively. I've been building some tooling around that.
That's pretty cool. If we go back to gaming, then you say that you did put gaming away for a little while because you were concentrating on coding and you were doing serious work, your words, forward, but then you did end up coming back to gaming at some point. Was it way later on?
Yeah, actually, it was much later. So the very abbreviated timeline is that right around when the 64 came out, basically after my Super Nintendo and my Genesis were no longer current, I pretty much stopped playing video games and focused exclusively on programming until 14 or so years old, at which point I got into the game Baduk, or Go. A lot of people in North America know it as.
Yeah.
And I studied Go under a tutor for almost a decade.
Wow.
Played it. That was the only game that I played, and outside of that, I was doing programming. And then when Undertale came out, that was when I went from being somebody who watches speedruns while doing programming to I decided I wanted to reverse engineer it after playing it. I was convinced, hey, you should play this, and so I picked it up, and it was neat. And I thought it would be fun to reverse engineer just the way that the RNG works.
Yeah.
And so I did that. That's actually why I even bothered registering a Twitch account, was to stream doing that just for fun. For the one viewer, which is to say nobody at all. Because you count as your own viewer.
Exactly.
But then after I did that, a friend of mine said, hey, you did all this work. You could just speedrun it now. You understand how it works. And so I said, what the hell?
But let's talk about Undertale a little bit, because you just ended up being in one of my sweet spots. I really love this game a lot. What drew you to that game originally? Like, okay,
so,
people... Yeah, go.
Yeah, there was hype. There was a lot of hype about it. I got exposed to the hype before it came out. And the whole idea of a game where, you can play a pacifist and your lack of levels, they would be a challenge.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't necessarily prevent you from finishing the game seemed really interesting to me. One of my favorite speedruns, just classes of speedruns to watch, is low percent runs.
Yeah.
And I thought this is a game that codifies low percent runs, and that seemed really neat.
Yeah, exactly, because you can get new weapons, but armor will still be useful, but weapon won't, because you don't fight. And you end up never gaining a level, so your 20 starting HP is what you'll get at the end. And like you said, the game is still 100% playable. It gets hard at some points, but you can do it. Yeah. I did play Undertale. I did play all of it, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Speedrun is really different, though. It's super interesting now how they use it's the pass that they use just to skip a lot of cutscenes and events, because they can continue
so that
walking.
wasn't found at the time that I was running it. So if you look at any of my PBs at this point, they're glitchless PBs, just because the glitches weren't even known at the time.
So how would you, because the first time I saw an Undertale speedrun, it was already using the pass glitch, so how did you optimize the game then at that point?
So you might have picked up on this, but I really like challenge runs, and it turns out that the genocide route is substantially more challenging than the pacifist route. So those were the genocide route is what I primarily ran. Okay. And then I also did some neutral route, which at the time was just genocide right up until you reach core, and then you just finish the game, as quickly as possible. Yeah. So the optimization was largely based on, working with the RNG, figuring out the correct number of fights to get in each area, and staying, on that sort of route.
Did you have a way to manipulate, like in an RPG most of the time you would like to manipulate it so you don't get random encounters, but did you have a way to manipulate it so you get random encounters? Because in a genocide you get a clear,
So when I was figuring out how the RNG worked, what I found was that there was basically a danger counter, but the danger counter got reset every time that you hit a screen transition.
Oh.
So in rooms where, two rooms were next to each other that had similar amounts of threat or danger or whatever you want to call it, until you get into a fight, the way that you would tend to handle it is by grinding out an encounter right next to the edge of a screen, killing everything, and then transitioning to the other screen, killing everything, and rinse and repeat up until you get to whatever the optimal number is for that area, so that you can then preferably get to the very end, have your final encounter right in the last screen, and then leave.
Were there any skips found at that time? Because you skip a lot.
No, nothing at that time.
Oh, that was probably I won't say more interesting, because the Undertale speedrun right now is super interesting in speedrunning ways, but I have to admit that I was a little bit disappointed watching the run, because it skipped so many parts that I liked, and speedrunning isn't about watching the cutscenes I like, of course, but I like the entertainment side of speedrunning, of course, and I realize it's all about speed, but entertainment is still important.
Well, it's not. One of the things that you'll find is that the communities tend to make categories, around certain things that tend to make sense, like just beat the game is always one of the categories.
Yep.
However many glitches you have to use, whatever you have to do, just beat the game. But then on top of that, a lot of the consideration when people are figuring out what categories are going to be the ones that get run, and what categories any individual community, kind of centers around, tends to be what's fun to play and what's fun to watch. More the former than the latter, but both of them tend to matter.
Yeah, I like how some long RPGs are trying to set up shorter runs, like the Paladin Percent and the Kefka at Narsh.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great ways to get people into those runs, too.
Exactly, and that's what I like to watch. I always like to watch super optimized run, but I like also the polar opposite of looking at someone trying it for the first few times. And when you look at those runs, most of the times it's less experienced runners, and I really like to see how they sometimes just think outside the box, and maybe most of the time it's slower, but you get to see other ways of doing things that I really appreciate.
Yeah, for sure. You learn backup strats because you have to.
Yes, exactly.
And having new people attacking a speed game makes the speed game better. We can look at the way that Strider changed really recently after the tutorial at AGDQ for Strider.
Yep.
Just the influx of new runners ended up being something that caused just one of the new people found this skip that skipped the entire final level.
It was the Darkman who did the tutorial, right?
That's correct, yeah.
It was super interesting. That was doing the play, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was super interesting to watch. I really liked that. Actually, I was... how can I say this? I was super impressed, but still, it was really strange, because I had thought about the concept of the podcast before that event, and I was developing the idea of maybe getting a second part to the podcast where we would try and learn a trick, some kind of a teaching tricks, which we will do later on. And then they were just introducing a tutorial part at GDQ, and I was like, so I guess there's an interest in that if they're doing it there, so I guess that it will work. I'm sure it will work.
Yeah, I think the interest is definitely present, and I think the more people that show how approachable speedrunning can be, the better.
Yeah, because like you said, a game can grow so much faster the more people there is. You will always get so many types of points of views, and when you get into a game for so long, like there's the two ways of seeing this. A new person will bring a new point of view, and that's a super good thing. But we're also talking with Yagamot from an earlier episode, and he was talking about the fact that there were very, very old tricks in, I think it was I Wanna Be the Guy Gaiden. And they became useless, and they became useless pretty early on, and then new players came in, and then there was a situation that makes these really old tricks that they could be useful again, but nobody knew about them because there were very few old players. And the fact that Yagamot was one of their very few to speedrun the game, he just resurrected a very old trick out of the blue that became relevant again because somebody found something else, and then that too was super fun to talk about, because I realized, like, yeah, that's experience that is considered irrelevant now that just became relevant again. And then everybody was like, where did you learn to do that? It was like, I always knew how to do that, but it was useless at that time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to chronicle and to document,
Yep.
glitches and tricks, even if they seem like they're not going to be useful at the time, because exactly like you're saying, we don't know that something won't be found to make something useful.
Yeah, and it's a crazy job to do. I mean, I've watched a few sites too, just for information purposes, but I've went into a few sites that people try to curate to show images, text, and everything, to say, like, even sometimes their thought process on how you should speedrun every part, every step of every games. And like, you can do that work, it can take you like a few months, and then you put it online and you curate it, and then it becomes completely irrelevant. Like, will you have the heart to restart it? And you have to, but this is it's a saint's job.
Absolutely.
And I applaud the people who does it. It's really impressive. So Undertale, you speedrun it for how long? When did you start to speedrun, just for fun?
I started to speedrun within a week of Undertale coming out.
Okay.
Basically, I beat the game, and then I pretty much immediately said, hey, this would be a fun reversing project. And so that was my life for 4 or 5 days. And then after that, I started speedrunning the game, because why not?
So around about 2015.
Is that when it came out? I mean, I'm going to believe you. You're probably correct.
I'm pretty sure, but 2014, 2015.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
All right. And you say reverse engineer it. So that's a way to say it, but that means that you had to have a particular approach to it. I want to know how you tackled that, how you went in swinging.
Sure. So my basic approach there was to open it up under a debugger.
Yep.
So that I could just watch the memory as I was playing the game.
Yes.
And then, because I was specifically going for the RNG that would determine whether or not I got encounters, I watched the values that changed in memory just as I stayed still. There's a trick where you can walk in place by holding up and down against a northern wall.
Okay.
So I would watch what memory values changed as I stayed in place walking, and then what memory values would change right as I got an encounter, and then after the encounter finished.
Okay.
And then that led to me, watching values across screen transitions, and that's where we started to figure out that there were just a few really interesting regions of memory that ultimately I figured out were determining whether or not I got an encounter, especially since they got reset to 0 when I got an encounter or when we hit a screen transition.
So it was pretty easy to guess that this was a danger encounter.
I mean, it's one of those things where, in hindsight, I can say, yeah, it was totally trivial. But at the time, it's not like I just opened it up and then 5 minutes later I had it figured out. There's definitely a lot of toil that goes into figuring out something like this.
Of course. Oh, that's really interesting. Coming from a programming point of view is really something like I don't think that way. I've always been a gamer, and I really like the social part of gaming in general. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But the programming side, like, I've discovered a whole other point of view or way of seeing things when I chatted last episode with Dwayne Goisi, and I seems to see kind of a pattern with you today too, which is super interesting. This is so this is I don't want to say mysterious, but yeah, that's another way of seeing things and tackle things that I find absolutely impressive. Like, this is really cool, and it's so useful.
It's just one of those things that I think people learn. Like, there's definitely a common mindset for somebody who does programming, or security tends to be a very slightly different one, which Dwango has that background as well. So if you're saying that we tend to think similarly, that's not necessarily a huge surprise.
Well, maybe not that similarly, but from an outside point of view, it this seems to be similar. So security, did you ended up working in that? Yeah, like, yes, right?
Yeah.
And you're still working in that field?
Yeah. Depending on the day, I'm either doing security or I'm doing, just regular software programming and building stuff.
All right. And can you talk about what company or what kind of more precise field of work you're doing, or it is like if it's security, maybe you can't?
I don't really tend to talk about my work
Sure.
publicly. It's just one of those things where I work. It's not super hard to figure out where I work. I have a public GitHub like everybody else does, and
All right.
my employer tends to be listed there. But in general, that's just a topic that I shy away from. When I'm in a gaming context, I like to talk about gaming and
Yeah.
the way that we can make things awesome for other people. And
All right, then let's talk about gaming. After Undertale, you ended up trying to play other games, right?
yeah, so I did Undertale for a long while, and then after I finished that, actually there was a period of time where I did, I would call it casual gaming. I didn't have a timer up, but I was doing real-time run-throughs without save states of the first two Kaizos.
Yeah. Mario Kaizo's, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the original Takamoto's Kaizo 1 and Kaizo 2.
Yeah.
I never did do Kaizo 3. I'll eventually go back to it, I'm sure.
Oh, that's cool. And those are super hard. Again, how do you tackle, like, it's not necessarily a speed game, just getting through it is actually already a challenge. But you said earlier that you like challenge run. How do you tackle such a puzzle? Because this is a puzzle.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that it's a puzzle, especially your first time through, and it's just patience. Realistically, you're throwing yourself into a wall over and over and over. But there's an adrenaline rush every time that you get past whatever your current sticking point is.
Yeah.
So you get, I mean, in Kaizo 1, there's just I would say the first 3 jumps are quite easy, but after that you get into an area where suddenly, you've got charging chucks, you've got spinies, you've got a bunch of stuff that you have to contend with all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get past that for the first time, it's such a great feeling. And that makes you want to continue because you got past that one thing. Now you need to get past the next thing.
Yeah. And you gave me a list of the game you speedrun in general. And even the challenge runs that you've made, you haven't given me a list of those ones, but I've heard you talk about a few of those here in chat and in other contexts. Don't take it as an insult because it's not, but you've played a lot of games in a really short time period. Is there a reason why you end up game hopping? Do you get bored with a game after playing it a long time?
No, I wouldn't say that I get bored with it. But there's a lot of games out there.
Oh yeah, they are.
So
they are.
It's one of those things where I've got a lot of friends who will play one game until the end of time, and I have a lot of respect for that because that's somebody who really hones their craft and makes sure that they are at the top of their game at all times. I like picking up a game, setting a goal for myself, and figuring out, what is it going to take to make the mark that I want to make on this game. Maybe it's getting a world record. Maybe it's getting a time that's within 10 or 20 seconds of what I believe to be the optimal time for the game, which is what I did with Wonder Boy: The Dragon's Trap.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just getting as close to the top as I can, like I did with Final Fantasy VI. But for me, it's got to be fun, and I think that keeping it fresh is a good way to keep it fun.
Yeah.
And I do go back to my older games, like coming up, I'm going to be coming back to Super Mario World, which was the second big speed run that I really tackled.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But, okay, so you play a few games, you change this, but starting a new game from scratch is exciting, but it's a lot of work too.
Oh, certainly.
You've started Agalos, I don't want to say a month ago, but I think it's something around...
No, it was 2 weeks ago. In fact, it is 2 weeks and 3 days ago was my first speedrun of Agalos.
Yeah, and it was super fun to watch. I'm going to be... I'm really sad to say that I've discovered you during SGDQ this summer. I would have liked to know about you earlier on, but it was your Shantae's run, your race against...
Okay, yeah.
Can you make me remember the name of your competitor?
JT Norimaki.
Yeah, which actually did a super job. You ended up trading the lead for the race like 5 or 6 times. It was a super fun race to watch.
Yeah, it going back and watching that video again, it was super super fun.
Yeah. Um, so I've discovered you like really late, sadly, but the first work I saw you work on was Agalos, and
Okay.
it was really interesting to see how you like I said, I really like watching people doing first try, first attempts, and then getting better, and I like to see those big chunks of PBs getting removed each tries. It's super exciting, and I really like the way you tackled how you tackled the game, how you like the analytical standpoint, the like you're really calm, you're really not stressed about what's happening, even when the game is and I'm gonna quote you, rude. You're never stressed about saying it. You just say rude, and then you move on. And I think that's a
Well,
really
it's got to be fun.
yeah, and it is.
That's the mantra that I have for speedrunning in general. If you're not having fun, then the people who are watching you are probably not having fun, and it's time to move on either to another game, another category, just change it up a little bit so that you can make sure that everybody's enjoying their time.
Yeah, and you have perseverance, which I like too, but you are not persistent to the point where a run is dead and you're still like, if there's something to learn, like you will continue, but when there is to be a reset, you reset, and I really like that. Like I wouldn't know. I don't think I would do an as good job as to decide when it's too much and not enough. Like when I watch your stream, when I've seen enough, you reset.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's one of those things that came, I think, with studying Go. Is with Go, it's a game where there's a winner and a loser, and knowing when to just forfeit is part of the game. Because if you forfeit too early, you're giving up chances. If you forfeit too late, you're wasting your time and your opponent's time. If I reset a run too early, I'm wasting chances. If I'm resetting runs too late, then I'm wasting my time and my viewers' time, and that's time that could turn into a PB.
On another run, yeah, of course.
Right.
Do we start talking about Super Mario World a bit?
Sure.
This game is, let's say, super popular on a speedrun standpoint.
Yeah, it's one of the bigger speed games for sure.
Yes, and it may have been a little bit broken through the years.
A tiny bit, yeah, maybe.
Tiny bit, yeah, maybe.
It has programming. It is definitely programmed in a way.
Yeah, of course it is. So from someone who's coming from a coding background, this game has to be super interesting. Like, to me, it just seems like
Yeah.
I could play it. I could try it. We will later on. But I will not understand. Oh, I mean, I would probably understand if you explain to me what's happening. Like, I understand the overflows and everything like this. But, like, it's probably like running a car with where you can see the engine through and everything is happening. It's probably super fun to play because it is programmed, like, say, in a way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that there are plenty of people who run Super Mario World, and you don't need to understand everything that's going on under the scenes to do quite well at it. And I know several people who are security people, who are programmers, people who, definitely have the facilities to understand what's going on under the scene. But it's not something that really drives them to dig in further. They just enjoy the run. But from my perspective, being able to take a look at the game and understand why any given trick is going to work is just it's really engaging, and it makes the game very, very it gives it another layer that I get to enjoy while I'm doing the run.
Yeah, I was watching That's Our Cool streams a few days ago, and he was doing like, I'm not sure.
He's been working on awesome Reznor kill.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was watching, and yeah, he summons the boss using, I think it's sprite overflow.
Sort of. He is using a glitch that assigns a specific sprite to be in Yoshi's mouth
Yeah.
while it is also not in Yoshi's mouth, killing it, then using it, transferring a stun timer from another enemy to it,
Yeah.
and then all of that culminates in Reznor spawning.
Yeah.
And you can use Yoshi to kill it immediately and just in the level, which is amazing. And
Yeah,
it's one of
because
the tricks
they're
that came out of the task community that's just it's it really shows a pattern that is true of software security in general, but of all of the bugs that I've seen in Super Mario World, which is that it's not one bug. There's several bugs that you have to use in rapid succession
yes.
in order for that to work, and that I think is really, really cool.
But not only is it fun on a coding standpoint and how the word executes the code, but also on a skill. Because Super Mario World, you can know how to break it day in, day out, but at the end of the day, this is still a very high skill game. You got to be good at it, and like you said, you don't need to understand what's happening under the hood. But you got to be good. You cannot play that game without practicing it a lot.
No, you definitely can't.
Yeah. And I think that's the mix of those two things that makes this game really popular. Probably the fact that everybody has already played it if they're old enough, and even if they're not, like you had to have that game. It came with the Super Nintendo, and it was fun.
It came with the Super Nintendo. It also, a lot of the current high-level players weren't introduced to it via the Super Nintendo.
Oh.
They played Super Mario Advance 2 on the Game Boy Advance.
Oh, yeah.
So there's an entire other generation of speedrunners that got their introduction to this game from a completely separate system, a completely separate engine, even. Like, the glitches that exist in the Super Nintendo don't work on that system.
Oh.
But even that, they managed to make it, an interesting enough game that interest persisted across to the point where now they're, world record level play in
yes.
Super Mario World.
Oh, I've never played the, it was on GBA?
That's right.
Oh, I've never played that version. Was it good? Was it fun?
You're going to get different answers depending on who you ask.
All right. I'm asking
it doesn't engage me the way that the original does. They made some changes, which I think are very interesting. Luigi has different physics, which is something that they carried over from Super Mario All-Stars, which in turn, pulled that from SMB2 US. Yeah. They added some different ways for the power-ups to work. They work more like Super Mario Brothers 3 US, where you power down as opposed to just immediately turning into small Mario. Okay. You also have a little bit more control over your item box. Getting hit doesn't immediately dump your item, which means that you don't necessarily lose it if you're in a really bad spot.
So it keeps being up there, and you can press select to get it back when you want it. So you could stay small Mario if you preferred that.
That's correct. Oh. So there are some new strats that ended up working quite well for that run as a result.
So you could use the damage boost
and other things that just didn't make sense in the original, because not only do you lose your power up all the way, you're also committing to dumping out your item box, so your backup's gone as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I will have to
it's
look
a lot of
speedrun
quality of life
one.
changes that are quite interesting. Although at this point, I think a lot of the people who started with the Super Nintendo version, just the quality of life changes don't make it more interesting for us.
I can get why, especially if you say that there's a lot of bugs that just don't work anymore. So it's a little bit more like you've trained to learn them and to appreciate them and get good at them, and now they're gone. So I guess that's a little bit sadder. Yeah. I understand that. Considering the background behind me, I think we have to talk about Final Fantasy VI a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. That was my favorite, one of my favorite games growing up. I think it's probably the single game that I've put the most amount of time into.
Wow. It's got to be the same for me, so we'll reach on that point. Did you play, like, you said that you played when you were younger up to Super Nintendo and you stopped at 64. Did you play Final Fantasy VI when you were young?
Oh, yeah.
All right. And so it was a casual playthrough at that time. You probably didn't know about speedrunning?
No, I definitely didn't. This would have been when I was 12, 13.
So choosing between, I know it's a hard question, but choosing between speedrunning and playing it casually, how did you prefer the game?
That one is tough.
That one is tough.
Final Fantasy VI. I'd played the other two Final Fantasies, and I'd played Dragon Warrior and other RPGs, Breath of Fire.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy VI was the game that convinced me that video games were on par with novels as a form of media, as something that could be used to convey a story.
Absolutely.
And certainly looking back at it and comparing it to modern RPGs, we can say, maybe the story wasn't as good as we all think. But it was compelling. It was extremely compelling in a way that surprised me.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I don't think that I could play it casually. I don't really play games outside of a speedrunning context anymore.
I understand that.
But I think that it's an interesting game. It's still engaging, whether we're speedrunning it or not.
Yeah, that's a favorite for me as well. I really enjoy the game. I've never speedrun it, but I understand why people will choose it, even though it's actually pretty hard to speedrun. It's also a very long game. But one of the thing I keep hearing on about, and it comes from every kind of speedrunning, platformers and everything, RPGs, even first-person shooters, like, if you don't know what game you want to speedrun, choose a game that you like the music, because you're going to be hearing it over and over
Absolutely
again.
True. It's absolutely true.
And
Final Fantasy VI definitely has some good music for you to listen to.
Yes, of course. And there's plenty of songs, and they're all good. So yeah, it's really even though the battle song, sadly, is one of the only one that I really not appreciate as much, and it's one of the few you listen all the time, so it's really sad.
The good news is that in the speedrun, you run away from most of the fights, so
absolutely.
You don't have to listen to it that much.
Yeah, yes, you run away from a lot of battles, except maybe a little bit in the beginning where you make the 2 soldier escapes and you give all the XP to Terra. Is it still done today? I think it is, right?
Yeah, that's still the strat.
Yeah.
You want Terra to be a minimum level, because your early leveling will cascade in terms of the benefit that you get from it as you pick up other players or other characters.
Yeah, I remember finding that when I was really young, and we didn't have. I come from a very small island, and we did have one video store, but it was not a video game store. It was for movies, and there was a small section with video games, so we didn't have a lot of choices. So we ended up playing a lot of the same games a lot of time, and Final Fantasy VI came out someday, so we picked it up, and it was super fun. I already played Final Fantasy IV, so I knew I was gonna like 6. And we played it, and we played again and again, and at some points we were renting it, even though we did play, like, I don't want to say too much of it, because I don't think there's too much of it, but we had to introduce challenge runs, and we were young and we didn't know what challenge runs were. We didn't have internet at that time, so we weren't comparing with any other community. So we were designing our own. And when we discovered that the party member that joins comes in at an average level, depending on what your other characters are on the party, we did do once, without using the glitch where you can go into the, I think it's the Lete River, where you can use a turbo controller and farm and grind infinitely.
Oh yeah. I'm not sure that that's even necessarily a glitch. That's just
an exploit.
Yeah.
We did manually level up Celeste to level 99 before ending the floating continent, so that every character would join at level 99, and we thought it was an optimal way of doing grinding, even though it probably wasn't, considering you could grind later on. It was way quicker, considering you'd get more EXP.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were young and we wanted to challenge ourselves, and it was really fun. We did keep that save for quite a long time on the cartridge.
Right on.
It was super funny. So you played also the infamously dreaded Final Fantasy Mystic Quest.
Yeah, I think that's one of those games that has a much worse reputation than it deserves.
Yes, I agree.
The game itself is actually quite fun, and the speedrun is really interesting. It is a very, very broken game.
Yes, it is. I did end up playing that game when I was younger, and I understand the flack it receives, but like you said, I at the end of the day, I still think it was a super fun experience. It's not as
call it anything else. Call it not Final Fantasy. Call it literally any other title. people would think that it's a very good game.
Absolutely. Uh, I understand why people may be a little bit overreacting to it because I think it was actually released especially to be a dumbed down version because they thought that people in the West wouldn't understand something more complicated. So it's a little bit insulting, I guess. But
Maybe, but you consider that that these were games that were released in under other series,
yeah,
and this was derived from Saga, if I recall correctly.
it's possible. That's possible. Yes.
And but this was just a derivation of games
Like
that were already being released, not to be dumbed down games, but also in the Japanese and European markets.
yeah, that's true. But at the end of the day, I still like really much Mystic Quest. It was a lot of fun. It was simple, but it had its moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, and so you ended up, like I said, playing a lot of games. But did you have a favorite amongst all of them?
Not sure that I did. I played a decent amount of games as a kid, and if we were to ask like which single game did I put the most amount of time into, I would definitely say Final Fantasy VI. But depending on my mood, I might, have been playing Lion King, or, I mean, I even had several very, very bad games as a child. The Rocky and Bullwinkle game for the NES.
Oh, damn. Oh, ouch.
Yeah, I got that for my birthday. And I did put a lot of time into that game. That was one of many games that I was able to beat whenever I wanted to as a kid.
How long did it take to realize that it was a subpar game?
So I was in a similar situation to you, not necessarily coming from from an island that didn't have a lot of exposure, but my family didn't have a ton of games.
Yeah.
So I certainly was cognizant that it was not of the same quality as a lot of the other games that I owned. But up until I think I saw Author Blues do a speed run of it at a GDQ.
Yeah.
It never really hit me that, oh yeah, this was a real bad game.
Yeah, when we're younger, we don't have the same way of rating game, I guess, and sometimes I end up defending games with friends or with people, and no, it's super good. Like I tell you, it's really good, and sometimes my friend will go like, play it again and just come back and we'll talk about it, okay? And I'm like, no, I'll defend this game with my life, and I come back home and I'm like, yeah, no, they don't understand anything, right? And I end up playing the game again. I'm like, oh, I was dumb when I was young, right?
Well, I mean, I think that there is merit to games that are less well loved or less known.
Yeah.
I think that even Kuso games are quite fun. It just takes a certain mindset that is geared towards finding the enjoyment in the game as opposed to finding reasons to be upset about it.
I totally agree, and I think that I've seen you participate, at least commentate on a few of the Kuso runs, so I think we can talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, for sure.
I really appreciate Kuso Grande, so shout out to Bro Sencha, and thank you for making this. I really appreciate this show.
Yeah, Kuso Grande is just delightful. It's a ton of fun.
I've watched a run where I remember 4-player racing a game. I think this is a game that you proposed, and you were commentating on it. It was like, I cannot remember the name to save my life, but it was a game where you could transform into a knight and a leopard, and you could pick up some strange thing and throw it, and it would bounce like a Koopa shell.
Oh, yes. That was Magical Kid Goo Goo, which was an unlicensed game that only existed in the Korean market.
Yeah.
And actually, it was really big news when it got dumped because it was a game that was sort of known about. Like, people knew it existed.
Okay.
Because it was in gaming magazines in the Korean market and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But the cart itself was extremely rare, and it was actually one of the few original IPs that was created by a company that largely focused on ripping off Nintendo releases. They did several Super Mario Brothers hacks, taking the NES releases of those games and porting them mostly to the MSX.
Okay. that game in particular, like, I think it defined really well, like, a not so good game that is actually not so bad. I remember watching people playing it, and I see where it was maybe a little bit too crazy at some points, but I remember ending up, and maybe it was a mistake, but saying to myself, well, actually, I could see myself playing it.
I think that you should. I think that a lot of Kuso games, a lot of games that we look at and we go, wow, that's just terrible. If we take time and we actually play them, as opposed to just going, the music sucks, the graphics aren't great, it looks like the controls stink.
Yeah.
Usually those are all true statements.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make them not fun. And being able to find fun in those games, I think, is a really valuable thing.
I get that, but I think there would still be a limit to me. I remember seeing.
Well, I'm not saying you should pour 100 hours into it.
I remember watching Yagamoth play the Rockman X.
Oh my gosh, that is such a fun game, though. It's really fun.
I will take your word on it.
With maybe a few air quotes around the word fun, but it's a surprisingly interesting game to pick up and play. There were several of us at, not this past GDQ, but a previous one, that were sitting down and playing Rockman X. And for viewers, this is Rockman, Rocman, which is a bootleg that ended up on the NES.
Yeah, and it's supposed to, like, the title screen looks like a Mega Man game, but at the second you press start, it's not a Mega Man game at all. And it's kind of crazy.
Not even a little bit.
And you can do these charge dashes and charge jumps, which are interesting, actually, from a platforming standpoint. But at some point when you do up and down travels, you will end up having... your screen will go a little bit crazy, and you won't have the correct palette swaps.
Yeah, that happens a little.
But the color is not necessarily a problem, but when a platform will appear, but there's actually not a platform coded or the opposite, that becomes complicated. Oh, that happens a lot. In all the vertical level, the left and right ones aren't so bad. And actually, I remembered having most of the music wasn't so bad, and I really appreciated that. It was funny, and there was a few exceptions still, but yeah.
Yeah, it shows a lot of the very common things that you tend to see in... So China, for a long time, tended to have a very strong bootleg culture.
Yeah.
Specifically because of a game ban. So they could have Famicom games, but anything beyond that tended to be banned. And the Famicom games, you had to justify the game's existence essentially by saying that it was educational in some way. And the result of that is that a lot of later games ended up being backported, which is how we have what have become affectionately known as demakes. So things like A Link to the Past exists on the NES. Super Mario World exists on the NES as CSMW, which itself is just it's an experience. I'm not going to go so far as to praise it, but I found it fun to run. None of my viewers enjoyed it because they had to listen to the music, but there's quite a few of these, and they're all extremely interesting, if for no other reason. The technical work that went into taking a Super Nintendo game or a Genesis game and bringing it, in this case, to an audience that wouldn't have been able to experience it otherwise. And
I remember seeing those kinds of bootleg games. Maybe I'm wrong, but I remember I've seen an Final Fantasy VII games remake with the Final Fantasy I engine.
Yes,
there is impressive.
The Final Fantasy VII remake. I haven't played that one yet.
No, me neither, but it was super
impressive. I found a place that'll sell repros of it, and I'm very tempted to purchase repros and play it blind on stream.
It's super fun to see how much work people have put into this, because you have to reprogram everything, and but not necessarily everything. You can use the game engine and the coding for battle and everything. It won't be the Final Fantasy VII battles. It will probably use the Final Fantasy I battle systems, but the way they try to emulate concepts in other games and apply them in an NES, which it doesn't have as much memories, it's super interesting sometimes. Have you ever dabbled in those kinds of things? Were you interested in I know you have search games to discover tricks, reading the RAM. You talked about that earlier, but were you interested in doing like a ROM hack or something like this at some point?
I've never done it. I've never really been into ROM hacking. I know a ton of people in that community.
Yeah.
But myself, I've never really done that too much. I've made a couple of challenge levels in Super Mario World.
Ooh.
Just because, I mean, Super Mario World is the easiest game to ROM hack in the world. But beyond that, I haven't really dabbled in that. Once you have too many hobbies or too many areas of focus, eventually you just suck at all of them. And I'm trying to avoid hitting that point.
Yeah, focusing on everything is not called focusing.
Yeah.
I think we get a really better idea of who you are, and that thank you for sharing that with us. But I want to also know a little bit what's in it for the future. Like, what are you aiming at in the next years?
Oh gosh. I mean, so far things have been great with the stream, with my runs.
Yes.
Like I said, I'm going to be coming back to Super Mario World. I'm going to be involved in Kusa Grande for the foreseeable future. I mean, make no mistake, I'm currently in the bracket stages. I'm going to get knocked out because people who are very, very good at video games and much better than me are in the bracket as well. But being involved with that has been fantastic, and I intend to be involved in it as it goes forward as well. Other than that, who knows? Picking up new games, going back to old games, just having fun with video games, and hopefully helping people donate money to charity in so doing.
Yeah, we will talk about that in just a moment. But so you consider, like, of course, you consider streaming a hobby in your, like, it's not your job.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you, like, I've went into your stream a few times and I really enjoyed it. How do you curate it? I don't know how to ask this question, but I went into your stream a lot of time, and maybe it's just your personality that attracts these kinds of people. But your stream and your chat is always super fun to chat with. They are always helpful. If I come in like 3/4 way in and you've been streaming for a long time, they will always catch me up. It's super fun to be in your chat. Seriously, that really good curating.
Well, thank you. No, I've gotten super lucky with my community. Part of it might be the personality, but I think that there is, as a streamer, there is work that you have to do, because if you don't know what kind of chat you want, if you don't know, where your lines are, you're going to end up with a case where, people will eventually step over whatever lines there might have been.
Yeah.
And then those lines get moved. I definitely, I've been lucky enough to have some fantastic friends who have wonderful chats. We've got Ty Tuesday and Smite, who are both just amazing streamers, and they both keep fantastic chats. Author Blues is another person that immediately springs to mind as somebody who has given me more than enough of a model to, between the three of them, I've got more than enough of a model to figure out how do I make sure that I keep the chat that I want to keep. And that way, if everybody, if there's this norm that's set, that everybody is going to be friendly and courteous to each other, and
yes.
Just keep that good vibe going. Then when you do have troublemakers who come in, those tend to be worked out pretty quickly and organically.
So that's how you are as a streamer, but how are you as a viewer? I've seen you active. I've seen you in a lot of other people's stream.
Sure.
We did meet and chatted over a few other people's stream. How many? I'm gonna say hours. How many hours a week are you watching other people's stream?
Oh gosh. It used to be a lot more than it is now. Just because I've been streaming more and more. It used to be that I would stream once or twice a week. Now I'm almost 7 days a week guaranteed.
Oh, yes, you are.
If I'm not traveling, I'm probably streaming. But I do spend some time. I've got several streamer friends, and I want to make sure that I'm supporting them.
Yes.
So I might be lurking. I might be, actively talking with them, especially at times when their chats are slow. Because as a streamer, when your chat's slow, you want to have somebody in there to help it move forward.
Yeah,
Um,
it's more fun when it's interactive. I agree. I did
yeah.
dabble in speedrunning a little bit, and when I did, I was at the point you started at, which is 1 viewers. Actually, I was actually lucky. There was a few friends that did come in and check the run, even though I don't think they were really into speedrunning. I think they were just being really good friends, and I appreciated that.
Oh, that's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, but at the end of the day, they weren't necessarily asking a lot of questions. They probably were just getting my view numbers a little bit higher because I don't think they're really into speedrunning that much. And if they are, well, thank you. But I don't think they were. And it was really important to me that even though I was streaming like for nobody's interacting with chat, to still be entertaining. So I was always talking. But after 3 hours of talking to yourself, knowing that nobody's interacting with you,
Yeah, eventually it does get old for sure.
yeah, it gets tough. Like, as long as you keep remembering why you're doing it, it's all right, and somebody can watch the VODs later on, and so commentating still get important. But I knew nobody was gonna watch my my VODs, but it was still, yeah, it gets lonely. I think that's the word. Like you're alone in your apartment, filming you
Yeah,
and talking to nobody, and that's really strange.
yeah,
But
yeah. There's a lot of levels of or layers of being alone for sure. And that is very much how I started out.
yeah, but at some points, if you're diligent, you do grow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. And let's jump into the next bit, and I think this is something really important to you. Let's talk about charities.
Sure.
Um,
Uh,
no, go on. Yeah.
yeah. Like you said, it's definitely something that's important to me. I'm lucky enough to, like you said, this gets to be a hobby for me.
Yeah.
I am otherwise employed. I do software, which means that the money that comes in from my stream, I get to give back.
Yeah.
And so I have been giving all of the money that comes in through my stream to Extra Life for the past several years.
Yeah. And I know you wanted to maybe just shout out or just maybe give like talking about other people that do the same, because there's a lot of people that like it's a hobby for them and they're giving all the money from their donation, subscription, everything back to it. Well, first of all, I will too. Seriously, if you're doing this, that's really appreciated. There's a lot of people who will use it and need it, and that's awesome. But streaming is costly. Have you never thought that nobody? Yeah, it costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
it definitely is. You've got your PC. In
yep,
my case, I've got an RGB setup for all of my classic consoles.
yep,
That is not cheap.
nope,
My capture equipment alone, especially due to the fact that I have two sets of it between microphone and camera, and then the capture card and the RGB setup. That's well over $1,000 right there.
yeah,
Having a nice CRT so that you can play your retro games. That's again, in my case, the CRT that I have was a PVM. Those are not cheap. There's a lot of costs that can go into this.
because I know every passion ends up costing money. If you're playing into sports, you will have to buy equipment, and that's the same for this. But I know a lot of sports or any other kind of activity can end up costly, but it is really costly to stream. Like if you want to keep on par, I don't have high-end equipment. I have like medium. I have okay stuff, but I could definitely spend $2,000 and still not being on top of my game.
Absolutely. Although it is worth pointing out, like if somebody wanted to start streaming,
Yep.
and they specifically wanted to start with retro consoles, with a CRT. Grand Pooh Bear started with a CRT that he found on the side of the road. Started with consoles that he played through RF and captured that way as well.
Yes.
You can get RF capture cards, capture devices that cost well under $50.
Absolutely.
For somebody who wanted to get started with this, there's definitely a very, very inexpensive route to being able to play video games on Twitch. So I don't want to make it sound like, well, you're gonna drop a few $1,000s to get started, because that's not the reality for most people.
Exactly. You don't have to have a face cam when you play. You don't have to have a lot of things. Like, if you really want to just show gameplay, which actually is the important thing there, yeah, $50, $100, you can have a pretty good setup.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
you're working hard, yeah. Let's go next into talking about a little bit of the shout out. We've talked about this earlier, but I knew you were torn between a few people. Have you made a decision about who you wanted to shout out?
Yeah. So JT Norimaki, the other person that I was racing at SGDQ this year, is just a tremendous streamer, and he. When you had said, I think that your exact words were criminally underrated for somebody that I might want to shout out, he is definitely a caliber of streamer that deserves much, much more recognition than I've seen him historically get. And I know it'll eventually, make its way to him.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do my part, because he deserves way better viewership than he gets right now. His streams are always extremely fun, extremely chill. The quality of gameplay that he puts up every single time he streams is out of this world.
I'll try to do my part too. I will extend an invitation to the podcast to him, and we'll see if he's interested in being a part of it. But maybe it will give him a little bit of a push in the right direction, because I've seen him play against you during the run, and he seemed like a really cool dude, really hyped. He was having a lot of fun, and he was very, I don't want to say emotional, but yeah, he was really into this. It was super fun to watch.